This dramatization is based on real events, but some details have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved. The purpose is educational, showing how seemingly minor conflicts can escalate when dialogue and understanding are abandoned. The Cleveland docks have always been a place where hard work meets harder choices. For generations, families have built their lives around the rhythm of cargo ships and the promise of steady employment in an industry that demands everything from those who serve it. Here, among the towering cranes and endless rows of shipping containers, communities are forged through shared struggle and mutual dependence. But even the strongest communities can fracture when fear takes hold. This is the story of the Riverside District, a tight-knit neighborhood where dock workers have lived, worked, and raised their families for decades. It's about what happens when trust, the invisible thread that holds any community together, begins to unravel. It's about ordinary people facing extraordinary pressure, and how quickly neighbors can become strangers when survival feels threatened. The events that unfolded here serve as a sobering reminder of how economic desperation, combined with fear and miscommunication, can transform a workplace family into something unrecognizable. This isn't just a story about what happened at the docks. It's about what happens to the human heart when it's pushed beyond its breaking point. What you're about to witness isn't about heroes and villains. It's about fathers and mothers, brothers and sisters, all trying to protect what matters most to them, sometimes making choices that would haunt them forever. Before we begin, we'd like to ask you to tell us your name and the city you're watching from. We love getting to know our audience. Also, please don't forget to give this video a like, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel. That way, we can keep bringing you more stories like this one. The morning fog rolled off Lake Erie like clockwork, wrapping the Riverside docks in a gray shroud that made the massive cargo cranes look like sleeping giants. For Miguel Santos, this was the most peaceful part of his day. Those quiet minutes before the horn sounded and the chaos began. Miguel had been working these docks for 23 years, long enough to know every supervisor's mood by their walk, every forklift's quirk by its engine sound. At 48, his hands were permanently stained with grease and salt. His back carried the accumulated weight of thousands of containers, but his eyes still held the determination that had brought his family to Cleveland from Puerto Rico when he was barely out of his teens. Another beautiful morning in paradise, called out Danny Kowalski, Miguel's closest friend and the dock's unofficial comedian. Danny's family had been working the waterfront for 3 generations, and he wore that legacy like a badge of honor, even as he complained about it daily. Miguel smiled, watching his son Carlos emerge from the employee parking lot. At 24, Carlos had his father's build but his mother's gentle eyes. He'd graduated community college with a business degree, but had chosen to work alongside his father while he figured out his next steps. The decision worried Miguel's wife, Elena, who dreamed of something better for their children. But Miguel understood. There was something about the docks that got into your blood. The camaraderie, the honest work, the feeling that you were part of something bigger than yourself. "Dad, you see the memo about the new security protocols?" Carlos asked, joining them near the time clock. Miguel shook his head. "What now?" "Random container inspections, updated manifest procedures, some other stuff. Thompson wants to meet with all the senior crew leaders this afternoon." Jim Thompson was the dock superintendent, a man who'd earned respect through fairness and a genuine understanding of the workers' challenges. Thompson had started as a dock worker himself 30 years ago, working his way up through every position before reaching management. If Thompson was calling meetings about security, it meant something significant was happening. "Probably just corporate covering their asses," Danny muttered. But Miguel noticed the slight tension in his friend's voice. Danny had been more nervous lately, though Miguel couldn't pinpoint exactly when it had started. The workday began like any other. The Santos crew, Miguel, Carlos, Danny, and 3 other longtime employees, was assigned to Section C, where a shipment from South America was being unloaded. These were the containers that required extra care: electronics, pharmaceuticals, high-value goods that made the insurance companies nervous. As Miguel operated his forklift, moving container after container from ship to storage yard, he found himself observing his co-workers more carefully than usual. There was Tommy Chen, who'd been sending money back to his sick mother in Taiwan for the past year, working extra shifts despite looking exhausted. Maria Vasquez, a single mother of 3 who worked double shifts whenever possible, had recently mentioned struggling to pay for her daughter's asthma medication. Old Pete Sullivan, who should have retired years ago but couldn't afford to stop working, had been limping more noticeably since his wife's medical bills started piling up. These weren't just employees, they were his extended family. They'd celebrated each other's children's graduations, attended funerals, shared lunch money when times were tight. Miguel remembered when Tommy's father had died, how the entire crew had chipped in for flowers and taken turns covering his shifts. When Maria's youngest had broken his arm, Danny had organized a collection that covered her lost wages while she stayed home with him. The idea that any of them might be involved in something questionable seemed absurd. But Miguel wasn't naive. He knew that desperation could make people do things they never thought possible. The cost of living kept climbing, while wages stayed flat. Healthcare expenses devoured savings. The American dream that had brought him to Cleveland felt increasingly elusive for the next generation. Just last month, his nephew Luis had been laid off from the steel plant, and his sister Carmen was facing foreclosure on her house. During lunch break, Miguel sat with his usual group in the break room, a cramped space with mismatched chairs and a coffee machine that had seen better decades. The conversation was quieter than usual, peppered with concerns about the new security measures. "My brother works the docks in Baltimore," said Maria, unwrapping her homemade sandwich. "He says they've got cameras everywhere now, like they don't trust nobody." "Maybe they got reason not to," muttered Pete, though he wouldn't meet anyone's eyes when he said it. "What's that supposed to mean?" Danny asked, his voice sharper than usual. Pete shrugged. "Just saying, ports are attractive to people looking to move things. Lots of cargo, lots of confusion, easy to hide stuff." Miguel felt an uncomfortable silence settle over the table. These were conversations that had happened before, but always in theoretical terms, always about other places, other people. Now, with the new security protocols and Thompson's serious expression that morning, everything felt different. "Hey, Miguel," called out Rodriguez from the manifest office, "you need to sign off on container 47B. There's a discrepancy in the count." Discrepancies weren't unusual. Paperwork errors, miscommunication between shipping companies and receivers, simple human mistakes that happened when you were moving thousands of containers through a complex system. Miguel walked over to review the documents, Carlos following behind. The container manifest listed medical supplies bound for a pharmaceutical company in Columbus. But as Miguel examined the paperwork, something felt off. The shipping weights didn't match the declared contents, and there were last-minute routing changes that hadn't been properly documented. More concerning, the container had been flagged for special handling by someone whose signature Miguel didn't recognize. "What do you think?" Carlos asked quietly. Miguel studied his son's face. Carlos had always been more suspicious than his father, more willing to question things that didn't seem right. It was a generational difference, perhaps. Carlos had grown up seeing corruption exposed on social media, watching institutions fail, learning not to trust authority blindly. Where Miguel saw a community built on trust, Carlos saw a system vulnerable to exploitation. "I think we follow protocol," Miguel said finally. "We report the discrepancy and let Thompson handle it." But as they returned to their work, Miguel couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. The easy rhythms of dock life felt somehow fragile, as if the community he'd helped build over 2 decades was balanced on the edge of something none of them could see coming. The afternoon shift brought unusual activity. Miguel noticed more supervisors than normal walking the yards, clipboard in hand, making notes. Security guards he didn't recognize patrolled areas that had never needed watching before. And there were subtle changes in his co-workers' behavior, hushed conversations that stopped when he approached, nervous glances, an underlying tension that seemed to spread like fog from the lake. During a brief break, Miguel found Tommy Chen sitting alone behind a stack of containers, staring at his phone with an expression of deep worry. "Everything okay, Tommy?" Tommy looked up, startled. "Yeah, just, family stuff." He hesitated, then continued. "Miguel, you ever feel like everything's getting too complicated, like the simple life we used to have here is disappearing?" Miguel sat down beside his friend. Tommy was usually one of the most optimistic workers on the crew, always quick with a joke or an encouraging word. Seeing him this troubled was unsettling. "Things change," Miguel said. "Doesn't always mean they change for the worse." "My mother needs surgery," Tommy said suddenly. $60,000. "Insurance covers maybe half if I'm lucky." He laughed bitterly. "I've been working here for 8 years doing everything right and I still can't take care of my own mother." Miguel felt a knot form in his stomach. He'd had similar conversations with too many co-workers lately. Maria worrying about her daughter's college tuition, Pete calculating whether he could afford his heart medication, Danny's wife facing another round of chemotherapy. Good people, honest people, being crushed by circumstances beyond their control. "There are programs, assistance," Miguel began. "I've tried everything," Tommy interrupted. "You know what the waiting list looks like for charity care? 2 years, maybe 3. He stood up, pocketing his phone. "Sometimes I wonder if there are other options I'm not seeing." After Tommy left, Miguel sat alone, thinking about the weight of choices that shouldn't have to be made. He thought about his own family's struggles, the quiet nights when Elena worried about their mortgage, the college applications Carlos wasn't filling out because they couldn't afford the tuition. That afternoon, Thompson's meeting lasted longer than expected. The security protocols were more extensive than anyone had anticipated. Background checks for all employees, new surveillance systems, restrictions on overtime that would hit several families hard financially. Most concerning were the new reporting requirements, policies that seemed designed to encourage workers to inform on each other. "It's temporary," Thompson assured them, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Corporate is just being extra careful after some incidents at other ports, nothing to do with anyone here." But Miguel noticed how Thompson's eyes didn't quite meet theirs when he said it, and he saw how some of his co-workers exchanged glances that spoke of conversations he wasn't part of. After the meeting, small groups formed in the parking lot, whispered discussions that dissolved whenever someone approached. Walking home that evening with Carlos, Miguel felt the weight of questions he didn't want to ask. The neighborhood looked the same. Small houses with well-tended gardens, children playing in the streets, the familiar sounds of families gathering for dinner. But underneath the surface, something was shifting, like the almost imperceptible movement of ice on the lake before it cracks. "Dad," Carlos said quietly, "what would you do if you found out someone you trusted was involved in something illegal?" Miguel stopped walking. "Why are you asking?" "Just wondering. Hypothetically." Miguel looked at his son, really looked at him. Carlos had been working the docks for 2 years now, long enough to understand its unwritten rules, its complex loyalties, its grey areas where right and wrong weren't always clear. But there was something else in his expression, a knowledge that went beyond hypothetical questions. "I'd hope I'd do the right thing," Miguel said finally, "but I'd also hope I'd never have to find out. What if doing the right thing meant hurting people you care about? What if it meant destroying their families?" Miguel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "Carlos, is there something you need to tell me?" His son was quiet for a long moment. "I just think things are more complicated than they used to be. People are making choices they never thought they'd have to make." As they reached their front door, Elena greeted them with the smell of her famous arroz con pollo and questions about their day. Miguel kissed his wife and tried to push away the growing certainty that their peaceful, ordinary days were numbered. Elena chatted about her job at the grocery store, about their daughter Sophia's upcoming high school graduation, about mundane neighborhood gossip that suddenly felt precious in its simplicity. After dinner, Miguel sat on his front porch watching the neighborhood settle into evening. Porch lights flickered on, televisions glowed through windows, the sounds of normal family life drifted through the air, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching something that was about to end, like a photograph being taken before everything changed forever. In the distance, a ship's horn echoed across the water, a sound that had always meant arrival, new cargo, fresh possibilities. Tonight it sounded like a warning, a note of impending change that would test everything Miguel believed about his community, his family, and himself. The call came at 3 in the morning, jarring Miguel from restless sleep. Elena stirred beside him as he fumbled for his phone, the blue glow illuminating his worried face in the darkness. "Miguel, it's Thompson. I need you and your crew at the docks in an hour." There's been a situation. The superintendent's voice was tight with stress, lacking any of its usual warmth. Miguel sat up, instantly alert. In 23 years, he'd never received a call like this. What kind of situation? I'll explain when you get here. And Miguel, call Carlos, Danny, Tommy, Maria, and Pete. Just them. Nobody else. The line went dead, leaving Miguel staring at his phone in the pre-dawn darkness. Elena was fully awake now, propping herself up on one elbow. What's wrong? I don't know, Miguel said, already reaching for his clothes, but I have a feeling our lives are about to get very complicated. The drive to the docks felt surreal. Cleveland's streets were nearly empty, illuminated by the harsh glow of sodium streetlights that turned everything an eerie orange. Miguel's mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. An accident, a theft, a safety violation that would shut down operations. Any of these could devastate the community that depended on steady dock work. He arrived to find Carlos already in the parking lot, leaning against his truck with the tense posture of someone preparing for bad news. Danny pulled up moments later, followed by Maria's battered sedan and Tommy's motorcycle. Pete was the last to arrive, limping slightly as he made his way across the asphalt. Anyone know what this is about? Maria asked, pulling her jacket tighter against the lake wind. Nobody had answers, but Miguel could see the same anxiety in all their faces. These emergency calls usually meant someone was getting fired or the company was making cuts. In their neighborhood, losing a dock job was often the first step toward losing everything else. Thompson met them at the main entrance, his usually neat appearance disheveled. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept at all. Behind him stood two men in expensive suits, clearly not dock workers, clearly not from their world. Thank you all for coming, Thompson began, his voice strained. These gentlemen are from corporate security. There's been an incident involving container 47B. Miguel felt his stomach drop. The container with the paperwork discrepancy, the one he'd flagged just yesterday. Suddenly, every strange detail came rushing back. The weight inconsistencies, the last-minute routing changes, the unfamiliar signature. One of the suited men stepped forward. He was tall, lean, with the kind of pale intensity that suggested he spent his days in boardrooms rather than sunshine. I'm Detective Morrison, Cleveland PD. We're investigating the theft of a shipment worth approximately $2 million. The words hit the group like a physical blow. Maria gasped softly. Danny muttered something under his breath that Miguel couldn't catch. Tommy had gone completely still, his face drained of color. The container was tampered with sometime between Monday evening and Tuesday morning, Morrison continued. The contents, legitimate pharmaceutical supplies, were replaced with weighted decoys. We believe this was an inside job. Miguel's mind reeled. $2 million. An inside job. The implications crashed over him like waves, each one more devastating than the last. Someone in their tight-knit crew, someone he trusted like family, had been involved in a massive theft. We're not accusing anyone specifically, Thompson added quickly, though his tone suggested otherwise. But we need to understand who had access, who might have noticed something unusual, who might have information that could help us recover the stolen goods. The second detective, a woman with sharp eyes and graying hair, consulted her notepad. Miguel Santos, you signed off on the manifest for container 47B. You noted discrepancies. Can you walk us through exactly what you observed? As Miguel recounted the previous day's events, he became acutely aware of his co-workers' reactions. Danny's jaw was clenched so tight, Miguel worried he might crack a tooth. Tommy couldn't seem to stop fidgeting with his phone. Maria kept glancing toward the exit as if calculating escape routes. Pete had adopted the 1,000-yard stare of someone trying to become invisible. Did any of you notice unusual activity around Section C over the past week? Morrison asked. Extra personnel, unauthorized access, conversations that seemed out of place? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Miguel knew his co-workers as well as he knew his own family, and their body language screamed guilty knowledge. But guilty of what? And how many of them were involved? Tommy cleared his throat nervously. I might have seen some guys near that section on Monday night. I was working late finishing up the Jakarta shipment. There were people there who didn't look familiar. Can you describe them? Morrison pulled out his notepad. Not really, it was dark, and I was focused on my own work. Just people who didn't belong. Miguel studied his friend's face. Tommy was lying, not about seeing people, but about not recognizing them. There was something specific Tommy wasn't saying, something that made his voice shake despite his obvious effort to remain calm. Anyone else notice anything unusual? The female detective pressed. More uncomfortable silence. Miguel realized with growing horror that everyone in their group seemed to be hiding something. The easy camaraderie that had defined their crew for years felt suddenly fraudulent, like a performance they'd all agreed to maintain while pursuing secret agendas. Here's what's going to happen, Morrison announced. We'll be conducting individual interviews with each of you over the next few days. We'll also be reviewing security footage, examining phone records, and conducting a thorough investigation of the theft. If anyone has information that could help us recover the stolen goods and identify the perpetrators, now would be an excellent time to share it. Nobody spoke. The weight of unvoiced secrets seemed to press down on the group like a physical force. Thompson dismissed them with instructions to report for regular shifts, while the investigation continued. As they walked back to the parking lot, Miguel noticed how the group dynamics had already shifted. Instead of their usual cluster of friends heading home together, people peeled away individually, avoiding eye contact, clearly eager to escape. "Dad," Carlos said quietly as they reached their trucks, "we need to talk." They drove home in separate vehicles, but Miguel barely focused on the road. His mind kept circling back to the implications of what they'd just learned. $2 million. An inside job. Someone he trusted, someone who'd eaten at his dinner table and played with his grandchildren, had committed a crime that could destroy all their lives. At home, Eleanor was waiting with coffee and worried questions. Miguel gave her the basic facts while Carlos paced the kitchen with obvious agitation. Their daughter Sophia, now 17 and approaching graduation, emerged sleepily from her bedroom to find her family in crisis mode. "What's going to happen to our jobs?" Sophia asked, cutting straight to the practical concerns that would affect her college plans. "I don't know, Mija," Miguel admitted. "If they think any of us were involved." "Were we involved?" Sophia pressed. "Were you involved?" "No," Miguel said firmly. "But I'm starting to think I don't really know who was." Carlos finally stopped pacing. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you. About Monday night. About what I saw." Miguel felt his world tilt slightly. "What did you see?" "I stayed late to finish some paperwork in the manifest office. Around 11 I saw Danny's truck in the parking lot. That was weird because his shift ended at 6, and he definitely left with everyone else." Elena set down her coffee cup with a sharp clink. "Danny Kowalski? He's been your best friend for 20 years. "I know," Carlos said miserably. "That's why I didn't say anything to the police. I thought maybe he'd forgotten something. Maybe there was an innocent explanation." Miguel felt sick. Danny, who'd been best man at his wedding, who'd taught Carlos to drive, who'd helped them move into this house 15 years ago. Danny, who'd been acting nervous for weeks, whose wife was facing expensive cancer treatments they couldn't afford. "There's more," Carlos continued. "I saw him talking to someone by container 47B, someone I didn't recognize. They were there for maybe 20 minutes, then they left separately." The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of morning traffic beginning to build. Miguel stared at his son, processing this information that changed everything. If Danny was involved, then the theft wasn't just a crime. It was a betrayal of everything their community had built together. "You have to tell the police," Elena said quietly. "I can't," Carlos protested. "It'll destroy Danny's family, Lisa's treatments, the kids' college funds, everything." "And what happens if the police find out you withheld information?" Miguel asked. "What happens to our family then?" The argument that followed was unlike any their family had ever experienced. Elena insisted that honesty was the only option, that withholding evidence made them complicit in the crime. Carlos argued that destroying Danny's family wouldn't bring back the stolen goods, and that sometimes loyalty mattered more than legal technicalities. Sophia, wise beyond her years, pointed out that their silence might implicate them if the truth eventually came out anyway. Miguel found himself caught between competing loyalties, to his family, to his friend, to the community that had sustained them for decades. Every choice seemed to lead to someone's destruction. By the time they reached an uneasy truce, Carlos would reveal what he'd seen if directly asked by police, but wouldn't volunteer the information otherwise. The sun was fully up, and it was time to return to work. The atmosphere at the docks was poisonous. Workers who'd shared easy conversations for years now eyed each other with suspicion. Productivity plummeted as people focused more on watching their colleagues than doing their jobs. The police had set up a temporary command post in an unused office, and the sight of detectives interviewing workers one by one created an atmosphere of fear and paranoia. During lunch, Miguel found himself sitting alone for the first time in years. The usual table groupings had dissolved into isolated individuals, each lost in private worries. When Danny approached with his lunch tray, Miguel felt his chest tighten with anxiety. "Hell of a thing, huh?" Danny said, sitting down across from him. "Yeah," Miguel replied carefully. "Hell of a thing. You think it was really one of us, someone from the crew?" Miguel studied his oldest friend's face. Danny looked exhausted, stressed, but was that guilt or just the natural reaction to being suspected of a crime? After 20 years of friendship, Miguel realized he couldn't tell the difference. "I hope not," Miguel said. "But $2 million, that's a lot of temptation." Danny was quiet for a moment, picking at his sandwich without eating. "You ever think about what you'd do if you really needed money? Like your family was going to lose everything?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Miguel felt the weight of his friend's stare, the desperate edge in Danny's voice that suggested this wasn't hypothetical. "I'd like to think I'd find another way," Miguel said carefully. "But what if there wasn't another way? What if you'd tried everything legal and it wasn't enough?" Miguel's phone buzzed with a text message, interrupting the tense conversation. It was from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Behind Building C after shift. Come alone. T." Tommy wanted to meet privately. Miguel's stomach churned with new anxiety. First Carlos's revelation about Danny, now Tommy requesting a secret meeting. How many of his friends were involved in this nightmare? The afternoon shift felt endless. Miguel went through the motions of his job while his mind raced through increasingly dark scenarios. If Danny and Tommy were both involved, who else might be part of the conspiracy? Maria struggling to pay for her daughter's medical care. Pete facing retirement with inadequate savings. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Every person in their crew had compelling financial motives for theft. The comfortable fiction that good people wouldn't resort to crime crumbled under the weight of economic desperation he saw in their faces every day. When his shift ended, Miguel made his way to Building C with leaden feet. Tommy was already there, smoking a cigarette despite the no-smoking policy. His hands shook as he brought it to his lips. "Miguel, I'm in trouble," Tommy said without preamble. "Big trouble." "Did you take the shipment?" "Not exactly." Tommy dropped his cigarette and crushed it under his heel. "But I helped. I provided information, access codes, shift schedules." Miguel felt the last vestiges of his old world crumble. Tommy Chen, who'd been working alongside him for 8 years, who'd celebrated every birthday and holiday with their crew, was confessing to being part of a criminal conspiracy. "Why?" Miguel asked, though he already knew the answer. "My mother needs surgery. $60,000, and that's just the beginning. I tried everything legal. Loans, insurance appeals, charity programs. Nothing worked." Tommy's voice cracked with emotion. "They approached me 3 weeks ago, said they could make my problems disappear in exchange for simple information." Who's they? People who know how to move cargo without paperwork. Professional thieves, Miguel. They've done this before at other ports. They said it would be clean, no violence, no one gets hurt. Miguel's mind reeled. "Danny's involved too, isn't he?" Tommy nodded miserably. "Danny, me and Maria, we were all desperate for different reasons, all vulnerable to the same offer. 3 of his closest friends, 3 people he'd trusted with his life, had conspired to steal $2 million in medical supplies. The betrayal felt personal and devastating, But underneath his anger, Miguel found himself understanding their choices in ways that terrified him. "What happens now?" Miguel asked. "That's why I needed to talk to you," Tommy said urgently. "The people we worked with, they're not happy about the police investigation. They think someone in our group is talking, providing information that could lead back to them." A chill ran down Miguel's spine. What does that mean? It means they're willing to do whatever it takes to protect themselves. They've made it clear that if any of us cooperate with the police, there will be consequences for our families. Miguel stared at his friend, processing the implications. The theft was no longer just about missing cargo. It had become a situation where innocent people could be hurt to protect guilty ones. His community wasn't just dealing with crime, they were dealing with criminals who operated outside any moral boundaries. "Tommy, you have to tell the police everything." "I can't. They showed me pictures, Miguel. Pictures of my mother's house, of Maria's kids at school, of Danny's wife at the cancer center. They know where we live, where our families are vulnerable." As Tommy walked away, leaving Miguel alone behind Building C, the full scope of their situation became clear. This wasn't just about a theft anymore. It was about a community under siege, good people trapped between criminal threats and police investigation, with no safe choices remaining. Miguel looked out over the docks he'd called home for more than 2 decades. The familiar sight of cranes and containers, ships and trucks, now felt ominous rather than comforting. Somewhere in this industrial maze, dangerous people were making calculations about his friends' lives, about his family's safety. The evening shift change was happening, workers heading home to families who depended on their steady paychecks and honest work. Miguel wondered how many of them knew that their peaceful community was balanced on the edge of something much darker, something that could destroy everything they'd built together. As he walked back to his truck, Miguel's phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. "Your friend talked to you. Now we need to talk to you tonight. We'll be in touch." Miguel stared at the message, his hands shaking. The nightmare was expanding, drawing him deeper into a situation where every choice led to someone's destruction. As he drove home through the familiar streets of his neighborhood, Miguel realized that the life he'd known, the community he'd helped build, the simple certainties that had guided his choices for decades, all of it was already gone, replaced by a reality where good people made terrible choices and ordinary families faced extraordinary threats. Elena would be waiting with dinner and questions he couldn't answer. Sophia would want reassurance about her future that he couldn't provide. Carlos would need guidance for choices that had no good outcomes. And somewhere in the darkness, people with no regard for family loyalty or community bonds were deciding how far they'd go to protect their criminal enterprise. The second phone call came as Miguel was sitting down to dinner with his family. This time the voice was unfamiliar, cold with an accent he couldn't place. "Mr. Santos, we understand you've been having conversations with your coworkers about recent events. We'd like to have a conversation with you as well." Miguel's fork clattered against his plate. Elena looked up sharply, recognizing the fear in his expression. Sophia paused mid-sentence in her story about her day at school, and Carlos set down his water glass with deliberate care. "I don't know what you're talking about," Miguel said, though his voice betrayed him. "Of course you don't, but you will. Tomorrow night, 10 p.m., Warehouse District, the old Petrick Steel Building. Come alone, and Mr. Santos, bring your phone so we can verify you're not recording anything. We wouldn't want there to be any misunderstandings." The line went dead. Miguel stared at his phone, his appetite completely gone. Around the dinner table, his family waited for an explanation he couldn't give without terrifying them. "Work stuff," he said lamely. "Nothing important." But Eleanor had been married to him for 25 years. She could read the fear in his face, the way his hands trembled slightly as he set down his phone. After dinner, she cornered him in their bedroom, closing the door firmly behind her. "Miguel Santos, don't you dare lie to me. What's happening at those docks?" So he told her. Everything. The theft, Tommy's confession, the criminal conspiracy, the threats. As he spoke, Elena's face went through a progression of emotions: shock, anger, fear, and finally a grim determination that reminded Miguel why he'd fallen in love with her decades ago. "You're not going to that meeting," she said firmly. "I don't have a choice. They made it clear what happens if I don't cooperate. Then we go to the police." Elena, they have pictures of our house. They know where Sophia goes to school, where you work. These aren't people who make empty threats." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, processing the reality that their safe, predictable life had become something from a nightmare. "So what do they want?" "I don't know. Maybe they think I know more than I do. Maybe they want to make sure I stay quiet about what Tommy told me." "And will you?" "Stay quiet." Miguel met his wife's eyes, seeing the fear she was trying to hide. "I don't know," he admitted. "I don't know what the right choice is anymore." That night, Miguel barely slept. He lay awake, listening to the familiar sounds of his neighborhood, distant traffic, the hum of air conditioners, the occasional bark of a dog, and wondered if he'd ever feel safe in his own home again. At 3 a.m. he gave up on sleep and walked through his house, checking locks, looking out windows, trying to spot any signs of surveillance. The next morning at work, the atmosphere had deteriorated even further. News of the investigation had leaked beyond the dock workers, and now the entire Riverside district was buzzing with rumors and speculation. Miguel noticed how neighbors who'd always greeted him warmly now watched him with suspicious eyes, wondering if he was one of the criminals who'd brought this trouble to their community. The police interviews had begun in earnest. Miguel watched his co-workers disappear one by one into the temporary command post, emerging hours later looking drained and worried. When his turn came, Detective Morrison and his partner subjected him to 3 hours of detailed questions about his work history, his relationships with other employees, his financial situation, and his observations about Container 47B. "Mr. Santos," Morrison said, leaning forward across the small table, "we have reason to believe that multiple employees were involved in this theft. Someone with your experience and position would be valuable to that kind of operation." "I reported the discrepancy," Miguel protested. "Why would I do that if I was involved?" "Maybe to throw us off the trail. Maybe your partners didn't trust you to stay quiet." Miguel felt trapped by the detective's logic. Every innocent action could be interpreted as evidence of guilt. His years of honest service, his reputation in the community, his genuine shock at the theft, none of it seemed to matter in the face of official suspicion. "We know about your family's financial pressures," Morrison's partner added, consulting her notes. "Your daughter's college expenses coming up, your wife's medical bills from last year's surgery, your brother-in-law's unemployment. $2 million would solve a lot of problems." The interview ended without charges, but Miguel left feeling like he'd been branded as a suspect regardless of his innocence. Worse, he realized the police had done their homework on every dock worker's personal situation. They knew about Elena's surgery, about Sophia's college applications, about every financial vulnerability that might motivate someone to crime. As evening approached, Miguel found himself facing an impossible choice. He could skip the meeting with the criminals and risk their retaliation against his family. He could go to the meeting and potentially become further involved in their conspiracy, or he could contact the police and hope they could protect his family from people who'd already demonstrated their reach into the community. Carlos found him sitting on the front porch as the sun set, staring at nothing. "Dad, you look like hell." "I feel like hell." Carlos sat down beside him. "Want to talk about it?" Miguel considered telling his son about the meeting, about the threats, about the impossible position he found himself in, but Carlos was already dealing with the burden of witnessing Danny's involvement. Adding more danger to his son's life felt unconscionable. "Just work stress," Miguel said. "This investigation has everyone on edge." "Dad, I've been thinking about what I saw Monday night. About Danny." Carlos was quiet for a moment. "I think I have to tell the police." Miguel turned to look at his son, seeing the moral struggle written across his young face. "That's a big decision." "I know. But if I stay quiet and someone else gets hurt, or if they find out I withheld evidence..." Carlos shook his head. "I can't live with either outcome. What about Danny's family? Lisa's cancer treatments? What about our family? What about all the other families who'll suffer if these criminals aren't stopped?" Miguel felt a surge of pride in his son's moral clarity, even as he feared the consequences. Carlos was right. The ethical choice was clear. But ethics were a luxury when criminals were threatening your family's safety. At 9:30 that evening, Miguel kissed Elena goodbye and told her he was going to pick up supplies for a weekend project. The lie felt bitter in his mouth, but the truth would have sent her into a panic that wouldn't help anyone. The warehouse district at night was a different world from the bustling docks during the day. Abandoned buildings loomed like monuments to Cleveland's industrial past, their broken windows reflecting the scattered streetlights. The old Petrick steel building sat at the end of a potholed street, its parking lot empty, except for a single black sedan. Miguel approached slowly, every instinct screaming at him to turn around and drive home. But the image of his family's faces, the memory of threats made against innocent people, kept him moving forward. Two men emerged from the sedan as he parked. They were dressed casually but expensively, with the kind of casual confidence that suggested they were comfortable with violence. Miguel recognized neither of them, which somehow made the situation more frightening. "Mr. Santos," the taller man said, extending his hand as if this were a business meeting. "Thank you for coming. I'm Mr. Rodriguez, and this is my associate, Mr. Chen." The names were obviously fake, chosen perhaps to mock the diversity of the dock worker community. "What do you want?" Miguel asked, not taking the offered hand. Rodriguez smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Direct. I appreciate that. We want to make sure we understand each other regarding recent events at the docks." "I don't understand anything about recent events." "Of course not, but some of your co-workers have been less discreet in their conversations. We've heard that certain people have been sharing information that could complicate our business relationships." Miguel's mouth went dry. They knew about his conversations with Tommy, probably about Carlos's observations as well. These people had been watching, listening, gathering intelligence on everyone involved. "Your friend Mr. Chen was quite distressed when he spoke with you yesterday," the second man said. "Distressed people sometimes make poor decisions about what information to share and with whom." "Tommy didn't tell me anything," Miguel lied. "Mr. Santos, please don't insult our intelligence. We know exactly what Thomas Chen told you, just as we know about your son's late-night observations and your wife's concerns about your recent stress levels." The casual mention of his family members made Miguel's blood run cold. These people weren't just criminals. They were professionals who'd been systematically gathering intelligence on every aspect of the dock workers' lives. Rodriguez pulled out a tablet and showed Miguel several photographs. The first was his house, taken from across the street. The second was Elena leaving her grocery store job. The third was Sophia walking to her car after school. The fourth was Carlos entering the dock facility that morning. "We're not threatening your family," Rodriguez said calmly. "We're simply ensuring you understand the scope of our awareness. We know where everyone lives, works, goes to school. We know their routines, their vulnerabilities, their relationships. What do you want from me?" "Nothing complicated. We want you to discourage your co-workers from cooperating with the police investigation. Specifically, we want you to convince Thomas Chen that sharing additional information would be unwise." Miguel stared at the man, processing the implications. They weren't just asking him to stay quiet. They wanted him to actively obstruct the investigation to help criminals evade justice. "And if I refuse?" "Why would you refuse? You're not involved in any criminal activity. You're simply helping to maintain stability in your community. Consider it community service." The euphemisms were almost worse than direct threats. These people had convinced themselves they were reasonable, that their criminal enterprise was just another form of business, that intimidating honest workers was a legitimate way to protect their interests. "Mr. Santos," the second man added, "we've done business in many ports over the years. We understand the economics of working-class communities. We know that dock workers live paycheck to paycheck, that they can't afford to lose their jobs, that they'll do almost anything to protect their families. We also know," Rodriguez continued, "that police investigations create anxiety that affects productivity, which affects profitability, which affects job security. Helping to resolve this situation quickly benefits everyone." Miguel realized they were offering him a rationalization, a way to frame cooperation with criminals as protecting his community's economic interests. It was a sophisticated form of manipulation that acknowledged his moral concerns while providing justification for abandoning them. I need time to think. Of course, but not too much time. The police investigation is progressing rapidly, and our associates are growing impatient with the complications it's creating. As Miguel drove home through the empty streets, his mind raced through the impossible position he'd been placed in. If he refused to help obstruct the investigation, his family faced retaliation from professional criminals. If he agreed to help, he became complicit in allowing those criminals to escape justice and potentially commit future crimes. Worse, he now understood that this conspiracy extended far beyond the theft of a single container. These people operated across multiple ports, stealing millions of dollars worth of cargo while intimidating workers into silence. Tommy, Danny, and Maria weren't just desperate individuals who'd made bad choices. They were pawns in a much larger criminal enterprise. At home, Eleanor was waiting up for him, pretending to read a magazine, while obviously listening for his return. She looked up as he entered, searching his face for reassurance he couldn't provide. "How did your supply run go?" she asked, maintaining the fiction that he'd been on an innocent errand. "Fine," Miguel said, hating himself for the lie. But Elena wasn't fooled. "Miguel, whatever's happening, we need to face it together. No more secrets, no more lies." So he told her about the meeting, about the photographs, about the impossible choice he'd been given. Elena listened without interruption, her face growing paler with each detail. "They're terrorists," she said finally. "They're using fear to control our community." "They're criminals," Miguel corrected. "But yes, they're using fear very effectively." "So what do we do?" Before Miguel could answer, his phone rang. It was Danny calling at nearly midnight, which was unprecedented in their friendship. "Miguel, I need to see you, right now. It's about Lisa." Miguel's blood ran cold. Lisa Kowalski, Danny's wife, was in her second round of chemotherapy. If something had happened to her... "What's wrong?" "Not over the phone. Can you meet me at the docks, Gate C by the security office?" Miguel looked at Elena, seeing his own fear reflected in her eyes. Another late-night meeting, another crisis, another complication in a situation that was spiraling beyond anyone's control. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. The drive to the docks felt like traveling deeper into a nightmare. Miguel found Danny standing by Gate C, smoking nervously and pacing in small circles. His friend looked like he'd aged years in the past week, his face drawn with exhaustion and stress. "Miguel, they came to my house tonight," Danny said without preamble. "While Lisa was at treatment, they were waiting when I got home." "Who?" "The people we've been working with. They said the police investigation is getting too close, that they need to accelerate their timeline for leaving town." Miguel felt his stomach drop. "What does that mean?" "It means they want to clean up loose ends before they disappear, starting with anyone who might testify against them." Danny's hands shook as he lit another cigarette. "They gave me a choice. Either I convince Tommy and Maria to leave town immediately, tonight, or they'll make sure none of us can testify about anything." Miguel stared at his oldest friend, understanding dawning like a cold sunrise. The criminals weren't just trying to obstruct the investigation, they were preparing to eliminate witnesses permanently. "Danny, you have to go to the police." "With what?" "These people don't leave evidence. They don't make direct threats. They just make it very clear what will happen if you don't cooperate." "What about Lisa? Can you get her somewhere safe?" Danny laughed bitterly. "She's in the middle of chemotherapy. She can't travel, can't be away from her medical team. And even if she could, where would we go? These people have resources, connections. They found us once, they'll find us again." Miguel realized the full scope of the trap his friends had walked into. The criminals had deliberately chosen desperate people with limited options, workers who couldn't afford to run, who had family obligations that made them easy to control, who had too much to lose to risk defying their handlers. There has to be another way. "Maybe," Danny said, "but it would require all of us to work together, to trust each other completely. And I'm not sure that's possible anymore." "What do you mean?" Danny was quiet for a moment, smoking and staring out at the dark water beyond the docks. "Miguel, how well do you really know the people you work with? I mean, really know them? I've worked with most of you for years. You're like family." "Family," Danny repeated. Yeah, I thought so too. Until tonight, when I found out that one of our group has been feeding information to the police all along. Miguel felt the ground shift beneath his feet. What are you talking about? The criminals know things about the police investigation that they could only know if someone was reporting to them from inside. They know which questions the detectives are asking, which evidence they've found, which witnesses they plan to interview next. The implications hit Miguel like a physical blow. One of their group wasn't just a victim of criminal intimidation. They were actively working both sides, providing information to both the police and the criminals. Who? That's the question, isn't it? Tommy's been meeting with the police, but maybe he's playing a deeper game. Maria's been acting strange, avoiding conversations about the investigation. Pete knows more about port security than anyone realizes. Hell, even Carlos has access to information through the manifest office. Miguel's mind reeled. The idea that his son might be involved in this conspiracy was almost too painful to consider. But Danny was right. Carlos had been in a position to observe unusual activity, to provide information to multiple parties, to play a complex game that none of them fully understood. Or, Danny continued, maybe it's someone else entirely. Maybe the criminals have been watching and listening so carefully that they don't need an inside source. Maybe they're just trying to turn us against each other. Miguel realized that this was perhaps the most insidious aspect of the situation. The criminals weren't just committing theft. They were destroying the trust and solidarity that held the dockworker community together. Whether or not there was actually an informant, the suspicion alone was enough to fracture relationships that had taken decades to build. Danny, whatever's happening, we can't let them win by destroying each other. Easy to say. Harder to do when you're not sure who you can trust. Danny flicked his cigarette away and turned toward his truck. Miguel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay. If you had to choose between protecting your family and protecting mine, what would you choose? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Miguel understood what Danny was really asking. If the situation came down to a choice between families, would their friendship survive? I'd try to find a way to protect everyone. That's not an answer. That's wishful thinking. Danny was right, and they both knew it. The criminals had created a situation where protecting one family might require sacrificing another, where survival depended on making choices that would destroy the community bonds that had sustained them for years. As Miguel drove home for the second time that night, he understood that the theft of Container 47B had been just the beginning. What was really being stolen was much more valuable: the trust, solidarity, and mutual support that had made their working-class community resilient in the face of economic hardship. The criminals weren't just taking cargo, they were taking the social fabric that held ordinary families together, replacing it with fear, suspicion, and the corrosive knowledge that survival sometimes required betraying the people you loved most. At home, Miguel found Elena and Carlos waiting in the kitchen, their faces grim with determination. "Dad," Carlos said, "we've been talking. We think it's time to tell the police everything. What I saw Monday night, what Tommy told you, what happened at your meeting tonight." "The risks," Miguel began, "are going to be the same whether we cooperate or not," Elena interrupted. "These people aren't going to leave us alone just because we stay quiet. At least if we help the police, we might have some protection." Miguel looked at his family, seeing their fear but also their courage. They were right, of course. Cooperation with criminals never ended with a single favor. It led to deeper involvement, greater complicity, and ultimately the complete corruption of everything they'd worked to build. But as he prepared to make the call that would irrevocably commit them to defying dangerous people, Miguel couldn't shake Danny's question about trust. If there was an informant in their group, going to the police might simply provide more information for the criminals to use against innocent families. The phone rang before he could dial, startling all three of them. The caller ID showed Tommy's number, but when Miguel answered, he heard a voice he didn't recognize. "Mr. Santos, this is Detective Morrison. I'm calling from Mr. Chen's house. We need you to come here immediately. There's been an incident." Miguel's blood turned to ice. "What kind of incident?" "Mr. Chen is in the hospital. His house was broken into tonight, and he was severely beaten. Before he lost consciousness, he asked us to contact you." Miguel closed his eyes, understanding that the violence everyone had been afraid of had finally arrived. The criminals had stopped making threats and started delivering consequences. Is he going to be okay? We don't know yet, but Mr. Santos, we found something in his house that changes everything about this investigation. We need to talk to you tonight. As Miguel hung up the phone, Elena and Carlos stared at him with expressions of shock and fear. The abstract threat of violence had become concrete reality, and they all understood that their community's nightmare was just beginning. "We're going to the police," Elena said firmly. "All of us, right now." Miguel nodded, finally accepting that there were no safe choices left, only the hope that doing the right thing might somehow protect the people he loved. But as they prepared to leave for the police station, Miguel couldn't stop thinking about Tommy lying unconscious in a hospital bed, about Danny's wife facing cancer treatment while criminals threatened her family, about all the innocent people whose lives had been shattered by a conspiracy that had started with simple desperation and had spiraled into something that might destroy their entire community. The weight of secrets had become unbearable, but Miguel feared that the weight of truth might prove even heavier to bear. The hospital corridor smelled of disinfectant and fear. Miguel sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair outside the intensive care unit, flanked by Eleanor and Carlos, waiting for news about Tommy Chen's condition. Detective Morrison paced nearby, speaking in hushed tones into his phone, while his partner reviewed a stack of documents that had been found in Tommy's house. It was 3 a.m, but the hospital buzzed with activity. Nurses moved efficiently between rooms, their soft-soled shoes squeaking against the polished floor. Somewhere down the hall, a machine beeped steadily, marking time in a place where seconds could mean the difference between life and death. "Mr. Santos," Detective Morrison approached, his expression grim. "The doctors say Mr. Chen is stable but still unconscious. He has a severe concussion, 3 broken ribs and internal bleeding that required emergency surgery." Elena gripped Miguel's hand tightly. Violence had always been an abstract possibility in their neighborhood, something that happened to other people in other places. Now it had arrived at their doorstep with brutal clarity. "Did he say anything else before he lost consciousness?" Miguel asked. "He kept repeating your name and saying, 'the notebook.' We found this hidden in his bedroom wall." Morrison held up a small leather-bound journal filled with Tommy's careful handwriting. Miguel stared at the notebook, understanding its significance immediately. Tommy had been documenting everything: dates, names, conversations, transactions, evidence that could destroy the criminal conspiracy, but also evidence that could send his friends to prison. "He was keeping records of the entire operation," Morrison continued. "Meeting dates, payment amounts, instructions from the criminal organization. But more importantly, he documented threats made against dock workers' families, including specific threats against children." Carlos leaned forward in his chair. "What kind of threats?" Morrison's partner, Detective Walsh, consulted her notes. "According to Mr. Chen's records, the criminal organization has been systematically gathering intelligence on dock workers' families for months. They have photographs, school schedules, work routines, medical information. They've been building leverage against potential witnesses long before the theft occurred." Miguel felt sick. The criminals hadn't just been planning a single heist, they'd been preparing to control an entire community through fear and intimidation. The theft of Container 47B was just one operation in a much larger scheme to turn Cleveland's docks into their personal criminal enterprise. "There's something else," Morrison said, his voice dropping lower. "Mr. Chen identified the inside source who's been feeding information to both the police and the criminals." The corridor fell silent except for the distant sounds of hospital machinery. Miguel felt his world tilt as he prepared to learn which of his trusted friends had betrayed them all. According to his notes, the informant is Maria Vasquez. Miguel stared at the detective in shock. Maria, the single mother who worked double shifts to support her 3 children. Maria, who brought homemade tamales to share during lunch breaks. Maria, who'd helped organize collections for coworkers facing emergencies. "That's impossible," Elena said. "Maria would never—" "According to Mr. Chen's records," Walsh interrupted, "Ms. Vasquez has been providing information to the criminal organization for over 6 months, long before the theft. But she's also been secretly cooperating with our investigation for the past week." Carlos shook his head in confusion. She's working for both sides. It appears that way. The criminals originally recruited her by threatening her children's safety. But when our investigation began, she contacted us and offered to cooperate in exchange for protective custody for her family. Miguel's mind raced through the implications. Maria had been trapped between impossible choices: protect her children by helping criminals, or protect her community by helping police. So she'd tried to do both, playing a dangerous game that put everyone at risk. "Where is she now?" Miguel asked. "We don't know. She missed her scheduled check-in 6 hours ago. We've been to her house, her workplace, her children's schools. She's disappeared." The weight of this revelation settled over the corridor like fog. Maria's disappearance could mean many things. She'd been discovered by the criminals, she'd decided to run with her children, or she'd chosen to fully commit to one side or the other in ways that could have devastating consequences. "Mr. Santos," Morrison said, "we need to know everything about your recent interactions with the criminal organization. Mr. Chen's notes indicate that you were contacted directly and pressured to obstruct our investigation." Miguel looked at Elena and Carlos, seeing their encouragement in their eyes. The time for secrets had passed. Tommy's beating had demonstrated the real cost of trying to navigate this situation alone, so Miguel told them everything. The late-night phone calls, the meeting at the abandoned steel building, the photographs of his family, the pressure to convince Tommy to stop cooperating with police. As he spoke, he watched the detectives' faces grow increasingly grim. "This is much bigger than we initially thought," Walsh said when Miguel finished. "This organization has been operating in Cleveland for months, possibly years. The theft of Container 47B wasn't their first operation here, and it won't be their last unless we stop them." "What about our families?" Eleanor asked. "These people know where we live, where our children go to school." "We're arranging protective surveillance for all the families involved," Morrison assured her. "But we need your continued cooperation to build a case that will put these people away permanently." Carlos had been quiet during most of this conversation, but now he spoke up. "Detective Morrison, there's something I need to tell you about what I saw Monday night." Miguel tensed, knowing that Carlos's testimony about Danny would complete the destruction of their friend's life, but he also understood that staying silent was no longer an option. Carlos described seeing Danny at the docks late Monday night, meeting with unknown individuals near Container 47B. As he spoke, Miguel watched his son struggle with the emotional cost of betraying someone who'd been like an uncle to him. "We'll need you to identify Mr. Kowalski in a lineup," Morrison said, "and we'll need detailed statements from all of you about your interactions with the criminal organization." "What happens to Danny?" Miguel asked. "To his wife?" "That depends on several factors," Walsh replied. "His level of cooperation, the extent of his involvement, his willingness to testify against the organization's leadership. But Mr. Santos, I need you to understand something. Your friend is facing federal charges. This conspiracy crosses state lines and involves millions of dollars in stolen cargo. Even with full cooperation, he's looking at significant prison time." Elena squeezed Miguel's hand again, both of them thinking about Lisa Kowalski facing cancer treatment alone, while her husband served a federal prison sentence. The human cost of this criminal conspiracy kept expanding, destroying innocent lives far beyond the direct participants. "There's one more thing," Morrison said, consulting his notes. "According to Mr. Chen's records, the criminal organization is planning to leave Cleveland within the next 48 hours. They're accelerating their timeline because of our investigation." "What does that mean for the witnesses?" Carlos asked. Morrison and Walsh exchanged a look that spoke volumes. "It means they're likely to try to eliminate anyone who can testify against them before they disappear." Mr. Chen's beating was just the beginning. Miguel felt a chill of fear deeper than anything he'd experienced since arriving in America decades ago. These weren't just criminals. They were professionals who treated murder as a business expense, people who would kill entire families to protect their operations. "We need to get you all into protective custody immediately," Morrison said. "Tonight." "For how long?" Elena asked. "Until we can arrest the organization's leadership and dismantle their operation. Days, weeks, possibly months." Miguel stared at the detective, processing what this meant for his family. Protective custody would mean leaving their home, their jobs, their community. Sophia would miss her high school graduation. Carlos would lose his position at the docks. Elena would have to abandon the job she loved at the grocery store. The criminals weren't just stealing cargo, they were stealing their entire way of life. "What if we refuse?" Miguel asked. "Then you'll likely be dead within 48 hours, Morrison said bluntly. These people don't make empty threats and they don't leave loose ends. As they sat in the hospital corridor, processing this impossible situation, Miguel's phone buzzed with a text message. The number was unknown, but the message was chillingly clear. "Your friend Chen forgot that hospital beds aren't always safe places. Remember that when you're deciding who to talk to." Miguel showed the message to the detectives, watching their faces harden with professional anger. "That's it," Morrison said. "We're moving all of you right now. No discussion, no delays." But before anyone could respond, the ICU alarm began blaring. Nurses rushed past them toward Tommy's room, their urgency suggesting a medical emergency. Through the window, Miguel could see medical staff working frantically over his friend's unconscious form. "Code Blue, ICU Room 7, echoed over the hospital's intercom system. Detective Walsh was already on her radio, calling for hospital security, while Morrison coordinated with uniformed officers to lock down the ICU. But Miguel understood with sickening clarity that the criminals had already made their next move. 20 minutes later, a doctor emerged from Tommy's room with the news everyone had been dreading. Tommy Chen was dead, apparently from complications related to his injuries, though the medical team was suspicious about the sudden deterioration of his condition. Miguel stared through the window at his friend's still form, thinking about Tommy's mother who needed surgery, about the impossible choices that had led a good man into criminal conspiracy, about the violent end to a life dedicated to honest work and family responsibility. "This is our fault," Carlos said quietly. "If we hadn't gotten involved with the police investigation—" "No," Elena said firmly. "This is the criminals' fault. They chose violence. They chose to hurt innocent people." But Miguel understood his son's guilt. Every choice they'd made, staying silent, speaking up, cooperating with police, trying to protect their friends, had led to consequences they couldn't predict or control. Tommy's death felt like the inevitable result of forces too large and ruthless for ordinary people to resist. Detective Morrison approached with grim determination. "Mr. Santos, your family is leaving this hospital right now. We have safe houses prepared, new identities if necessary, everything you need to stay alive until we can arrest these people." "What about Danny? What about Maria's children?" "We'll find them, but right now your family's safety is our priority." As they prepared to leave the hospital, Miguel took one last look at Tommy Chen's room. His friend had died trying to do the right thing, trying to provide evidence that could stop the criminals who destroyed so many lives. Tommy's notebook had given police the information they needed to build their case, but it had also cost him his life. The drive to the safe house took them through neighborhoods Miguel had known for decades, past the grocery store where Elena worked, past Sophia's high school, past the docks where he'd spent his adult life. All of it looked different now, tinged with the knowledge that they might never safely return to any of these familiar places. The safe house was a nondescript suburban ranch in a development 40 minutes outside Cleveland. Federal agents were waiting with basic supplies and security equipment. Miguel's family was assigned fake names, temporary documentation, and strict instructions about maintaining their cover. "How long?" Elena asked the agent in charge. "Depends on how quickly we can locate and arrest the organization's leadership. Could be days, could be months." Sophia, who'd been quiet throughout this ordeal, finally spoke up. "What about my graduation? What about my college applications?" The agent's expression softened slightly. "We'll do everything we can to minimize the disruption to your education. But right now, staying alive is more important than staying in school." Miguel watched his daughter process this reality, that her carefully planned future had been derailed by criminals she'd never met, that her father's honest work had somehow led to the destruction of everything she'd been working toward. That first night in the safe house, Miguel lay awake listening to unfamiliar sounds, different traffic patterns, different neighbor noises, different rhythms that reminded him constantly that they were in hiding. Elena slept fitfully beside him, occasionally muttering the names of friends and coworkers they'd left behind without warning. Carlos had taken the first watch, sitting by the window with a federal agent, learning how to spot surveillance and potential threats. Miguel's son was learning skills no young man should need, preparing for a life where vigilance might be the price of survival. Around 3 a.m., Miguel's secure phone rang. Detective Morrison's voice was tense with urgency. "We found Maria Vasquez. She's alive, but barely. Someone tried to kill her and her children 6 hours ago." Miguel sat up, immediately alert. "Are they okay?" "Maria's in critical condition at Metro Hospital. The children are physically unharmed but traumatized. The attack happened at a motel where she thought they were safe." Miguel felt sick. Maria had tried to protect her children by cooperating with both sides, and now they'd all paid the price for her impossible choices. "There's more," Morrison continued. "Before the attack, Maria managed to call in information about the criminal's location. We're conducting raids right now across the city." Miguel could hear distant sirens through the safe house windows, the sounds of law enforcement moving against the organization that had terrorized his community. "Will this end it?" "We don't know yet. These people have been operating for years, in multiple cities. Even if we arrest the local leadership, there might be others who could continue their operations." As dawn broke over their temporary refuge, Miguel understood that their ordeal was far from over. The criminal conspiracy had roots deeper than anyone had imagined, connections that extended far beyond Cleveland's docks. Stopping the immediate threat might require years of investigation, testimony, and legal proceedings. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Miguel felt a glimmer of hope. Tommy Chen's death hadn't been in vain if it led to justice for the organization that had destroyed so many lives. Maria's courage in providing information, despite the personal cost, might save other families from similar tragedies. Elena found him standing by the kitchen window, watching the sun rise over an unfamiliar landscape. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About starting over," Miguel said. "About what we rebuild when this is finished. Do you think we can go home?" Miguel considered this question, thinking about their house, their neighborhood, the docks where he'd worked for more than 2 decades. All of it had been contaminated by violence and fear, marked by the knowledge that criminals had walked those streets, threatened those families, turned that community into a battleground. "Maybe," he said finally. "But even if we can't, we'll build something new, something better." Elena leaned against him, both of them drawing strength from their physical closeness, in a situation where everything else felt uncertain. "Miguel, do you regret getting involved? Do you regret trying to do the right thing?" Miguel thought about Tommy Chen, dead for trying to document criminal activity, about Danny Kowalski facing prison for choices made out of desperation, about Maria Vasquez fighting for her life after trying to protect both her children and her community. "No," he said finally. "I regret that we had to get involved. I regret that good people were put in impossible situations, but I don't regret trying to do the right thing." Carlos joined them in the kitchen, looking exhausted after his night watch. "Dad, the agent says they arrested 12 people in last night's raids, including the 2 men you met at the steel building." Miguel felt a surge of relief mixed with lingering anxiety. Arrests didn't guarantee convictions, and convictions didn't guarantee safety, but it was a beginning, a first step toward reclaiming their community from the fear that had dominated it for months. "What happens next?" Sophia asked, emerging from her bedroom with the resilience that had always amazed Miguel about his daughter. "Next we wait," Miguel said. "We testify when the time comes. We help the police build their case, and we figure out how to put our lives back together." "Together," Elena emphasized. "Whatever comes next, we face it as a family." Miguel nodded, understanding that this was perhaps the most important lesson from their ordeal. The criminals had tried to divide them, to turn neighbor against neighbor, friend against friend, family member against family member. But ultimately the bonds of love and loyalty had proven stronger than fear and intimidation. Outside, the sun continued to rise over their temporary refuge, marking the beginning of what Miguel hoped would be their journey back to safety, back to community, back to the simple certainties that had sustained them before their world fell apart. But even as he allowed himself to hope, Miguel understood that some changes were permanent. They would never again take safety for granted, never again assume that honest work and good intentions were sufficient protection against the violence that could destroy any community. The weight of secrets had nearly crushed them all. Now they would learn to live with the weight of truth, with the knowledge that doing the right thing sometimes required sacrificing everything they'd worked to build. But they would do it together, as a family, as a community of people committed to protecting each other from the darkness that always lurked at the edges of ordinary life. The Cleveland docks would continue their eternal rhythm of ships and cargo, workers and families, dreams and struggles. But they would do so with the hard-won understanding that survival sometimes required courage beyond anything they'd imagined possible. And in hospital rooms and courtrooms, in safe houses and witness protection programs, the work of justice would continue, slow, imperfect, but ultimately more powerful than the forces of fear and violence that had temporarily triumphed over their peaceful community. Tommy Chen's notebook had become evidence in a federal case that would span years and affect dozens of families. His sacrifice had given meaning to the suffering of everyone touched by this conspiracy, transforming their individual tragedies into collective testimony against the criminals who'd tried to steal not just cargo, but the very soul of their community. Miguel Santos looked out at the dawn and saw not just the end of one nightmare, but the beginning of a long journey toward healing, justice, and the possibility of home. Final note: this dramatization explored themes of economic desperation, community solidarity, and the moral complexities faced by ordinary people under extraordinary pressure. While based on the structure of real events, names and specific details have been changed to protect privacy and emphasize the universal human elements of the story. The story serves as a reminder that criminal organizations often target working-class communities precisely because economic vulnerability makes people easier to exploit and intimidate. But it also demonstrates that courage, family loyalty, and commitment to justice can ultimately triumph over fear and violence. If you or someone you know is facing similar pressures or threats, resources are available through local law enforcement, victim assistance programs, and community support organizations.